Just tell Joe to shut up. Well, they have it. It's up to the chair tonight on the outside. And nobody's got the version. Yeah, that's pretty good. Village board is from what I understand, a lot of the committees, they're all virtual. And it just came out with the thought that sounds up to the chair.
Well, it's nice to discuss.
I was talking to my old partner.
Okay, I'm going to call the Village of Waynesville Zoning Board of Appeals meeting to order, and I'd ask you to please stand for the pledge of the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Andrews,
Here.
Mr. Freeze,
Here.
Mr. Tyne,
Here.
Mr. Celeste,
Here.
Ms. Fullwiler,
Yeah.
Trustee Etu,
I think he's on.
He's on, but he's muted.
Mr. Grieco,
He will be on shortly, not on yet.
Mr. Masters,
Here.
Mr. Boyle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, I will ask for a motion to accept the minutes from the January 20th, 2021 meeting.
So
Motion by Ms. Fullwiler. Second by Mr. Freeze. All in favor?
Aye.
Carried. All right, tonight we have two items on the agenda. The first is ZBA log 2021-ZBA2, an area variance for 5601 Main Street. The applicant wishes to apply for variance regarding front and rear setback, building height, parking requirement, and dumpster location for new outdoor seating project. Mr. Sutton, if you would wait, could you wait until we get our attorney on? Okay, before you present your case, thank you. You can put a couple of things in the record for while we're waiting. One is a letter received from, let's get it right here. Center of Plastic Surgery. There's a letter that they sent to the yes, it was, so it says, as you are aware, as we are unable to attend the zoning board meeting on Wednesday, March 17, 2021, due to previous commitments, we appreciate your offering to read our objections to the requested variance that the Irishman Pub has requested the village zoning board to consider. We wish to relay that we have strong objections to any outdoor seating project that will limit the parking spaces for this business. It is our contention that there are already too few parking spaces for the number of customers this business serves at any one time. Everyone knows that there's a parking issue on Main Street, and taking away any spots would exacerbate the problem that already exists. We have had several issues with customers of the Irishman Pub who have been parking in our lot across the street at 5604 Main Street. When approached, their customers have stated that they were told that it was okay to park in our lot by Irishman staff. As owners of the property of 5609 through 5611 Main Street, 5590 Main Street, 78 East Spring Street, as well as 5604 Main Street, we reserve the right to offer our parking lot for patrons of Brightsmith Brewery, Share Restaurant, and More Pet exclusively after 5 p.m. Parking by anyone going to the Irishman is not authorized, and those cars are at risk of being towed. There simply is not enough room for everyone. We also want to make sure that any change in dumpster location from the Irishman pub will not affect the outdoor seating atmosphere for customers at Brightsmith Brewing. Fences do not stop or do not keep out smells. We are concerned that a change in location would be detrimental and unfair to our tenant. Thank you for considering our objections. Sincerely, Zeev Scharf. And then secondly, I'd like to put into the record that I received a phone call personally at home from Mr. Young from Ed Young's Hardware. And he also voiced opposition to the variances. He wasn't against the variances for the outdoor seating or whatever, but his objection was to the parking. And he said that his problem is that he has to hire someone to sit in his lot to make sure that nobody parks there that is not a customer of Ed Young's. So that's on the record also.
Chips in, so that.
Chips in? Okay, good. Okay, so Mr. Sutton, at this time, if you'd like to give your presentation, just be aware that we will have allow anyone from the audience to speak in favor or opposition. Just address the 5 points, please. And after you've addressed it, we will have any questions from the board for you. Thank you. Oh, there's the formality of reading the official note,
I would be waive that.
you would waive that. Okay, thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Dave Sutton from Sutton Architecture. Here today to present a outdoor patio expansion, which results in the necessity of 2 variances. The 2 variances are dumpster enclosure location and number of required parking spaces on premise. And I will talk a little bit about the project, and then I will also address both of the variances requested and also review the 5 points of which a variance is merited. So the project is really an opportunity to take advantage of the back part of this parcel to add an outdoor dining experience, an outdoor patio experience, and give a little bit of variety. In light of what's happened over the last year, we feel, as many restaurants do, that we have to provide alternatives for patrons. If you don't provide those alternatives, you will lose your patrons. So the idea of providing an outdoor dining establishment or patio opportunity that takes advantage of the view will allow the Irishman to remain competitive in acquiring patrons during summer months. Recently, the property next door has seen a lot of success with their patio opportunity, and it actually has proven to be, as all patios have been, very valuable assets to the businesses during the last year. It's our opinion that even though the COVID situation is getting better and the light is at the end of the tunnel, we also feel as if it has significantly redefined how people are going to be gathering and how people are going to be going to dining establishments. So the idea is not to add seating. The idea is to, during summer months, add an alternative or an option for seating outside, which not only takes advantage of a newly defined social distancing, but also takes advantage of the view, which is very underappreciated right now. The idea of having a parking lot go right up to the water and the beautiful view of the vantage point, it's kind of unfortunate that it's not being taken advantage of. And a perfect example is the property right next door. The success of that beer garden has proven that the natural features and the creek and the island park and the views are really assets that should be appreciated, not in a parking lot fashion, but in a patio. So that's what the project is all about. The variances, the dumpster enclosure, I very much respect the neighboring property, B Sharp, made some pretty good comments. In actuality, we are relocating that dumpster. Yes, we're moving it forward, which is gonna put it in further violation. The code states that it has to be in the backyard of the property. As we all know, this property has very little backyard because of the creek, and it's the most opportunistic area of the property. So we have relocated the dumpster, moving it forward slightly. It is still very much out of sight, both on Main Street, all neighboring properties, as well as all dining experiences on property. So the idea of the relocation is actually further enhanced by the design. We've gone to great lengths to make this what could arguably be the best looking dumpster enclosure in the village of Williamsville. It's not, we've had an opportunity to present to the planning board already. They've given us our comments about materials and really the way or the appearance that it is. And we have taken them all to heart. We have, used some high-end materials, some brick structure to enclose and confine that. So the idea of the dumpster enclosure, I would argue that the new proposed dumpster location and the enhancements as a result of this project make the dumpster enclosure a far better and more appealing setup than what is currently there. In regards to the parking, the idea once again is not to add an increased demand for of patrons. It's to give an alternative. As you might come to understand, in the summer months, the outdoor may be full with patrons and the inside is empty. And in the winter months, obviously, then the building is utilized to its larger capacity because the patio is not being utilized during the winter months. So the parking is going to not have any real impact in terms of increase in demand in parking. But we are here today because we are actually subtracting or eliminating 2 parking spaces. The argument that I might suggest is that the 2 parking spaces that are being omitted in light of this development and this opportunity is minimal and insignificant in the parking demand for not only the property, but also for the district in general. One of the big assets that this property has that is not common of all properties in the village of Williamsville is directly adjacent to the municipal parking lot. And I can say that the Irishmen and Maria have done a great job at making sure the patrons park in the municipal lot where they're allowed and welcome to park, and discourages any parking of neighboring buildings or having an impact. And she does everything in her power and her personnel to really encourage the people to use the municipal lot. And there's an abundance of parking at the municipal lot. And the idea here is also when this establishment is peak and busy times, the municipal lot is underutilized from a business or a 9-to-5 business establishment or standpoint, therefore allowing for ample parking for any deficiency of the 2 parking spaces that we are eliminating. So that's a summary of the project, a brief description of the variances. I can describe or address the 5 criteria. Will it create an undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood? In my opinion, absolutely not. I don't think that either one of these variances will create an undesirable change in the neighborhood. In actuality, if you look at the project as a whole, I think it actually is an enhancement to the character of the neighborhood. Whether the benefit can be sought through any other method feasible, we have pursued a whole bunch of different options regarding an opportunity for parking. The one thing that Tim and the planning board and I did come up with is if we are allowed to move the handicap parking spot to a further location, we might actually be able to add one spot. I just have to get Tim's clearance to do that, because technically the New York State Building Code suggests that that parking spot should be the closest possible to the entrance. So it's not really further away, but we would utilize that aisleway in a better fashion. So if Tim agrees that it would be a better opportunity to move that parking spot, we'd be more than willing to offer that up. But once again, we would still need the variance because we are eliminating, or we're going to be eliminating one parking spot, which still would require a variance. Whether the requested area variance is, area variance is substantial. Once again, we're asking for a variance of a decrease of up to no more than 2 parking spaces. I feel as that has very little impact on the overall nature of the property, and the benefits far outweigh any detriment that the 2 parking spaces would help. And as far as the dumpster, as far as whether it is substantial, it's already a non-conforming situation. We're moving it forward, but we're definitely enhancing the visual and the characteristics of that dumpster. So once again, I think the benefits far outweigh any detriment. Whether the proposed variance will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental condition of the neighborhood, absolutely not. I think that it would actually have an enhancement. The patio is going to take advantage of all the views, the opportunities that are really there in terms of the creek, in terms of Island Park. Now, whether the alleged difficulty is self-created. Of course, that's a difficult one, but we do realize that that is not a necessity for your decision today. We understand that this is a balancing test, and we feel that the creation of the outdoor patio is somewhat not self-created because the corona virus in the situation has forced us to redefine our dining opportunities or offerings. So I would argue that it's not self-created, but once again, a result of producing or providing alternative dining experiences for the patrons in order to continue to compete with other businesses who might be offering that. So that being said, I would gladly answer any questions of the board or anyone from the audience, of course.
Okay, before we open it up to the audience, I just a couple of things I want to clarify from what your presentation was and what the paperwork we have. First of all, the question for Tim: did the increase in seating increase the parking requirement?
It's not the increase in occupancy that triggers the parking, it's actually the building square footage in our code. So every 1,000 square foot of building in the design center prescribes 1.5 spaces.
Okay.
So that's how we got the calculation for the 12.
And that includes this new building?
Yes, and that's unclear whether, because the question was accessory structure or principal building, which came up. I did include it. You know, it's debatable as to whether or not you could exclude it.
Okay.
I included it.
So what you came up with is 12
I came
required
up with
spaces,
12 that's required.
including that new area.
Yes.
Okay, and then, Mr. Sutton, you mentioned 2 variances, and our paperwork all says 3 variances. There's a parking variance, there's
Third one's
a
a transparency one we talked about. Remember, we were gonna-
building transparency,
So the third one, we were unclear if this is an actual variance requirement or not. The rendering that was distributed with the package that Tim said that he gave to each of you, the visual piece that actually faces Main Street. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I didn't know what that was supposed to be.
Has a series of windows. Now, what we are doing is we're creating, once again, the dumpster enclosure. And then there's a series of windows there that we are actually putting as full windows because there is a storage area behind there, some dumpsters and stuff like that. So the planning board was questioning whether the transparency rule of the mixed-use design standards applied to accessory structures. It is not specific, and Tim and I reviewed this, and if it faces Main Street, it has to have a level of transparency in the windows, and I think it's 70% transparency. Obviously, that's not applicable for this, and the question was, if it's an accessory structure, it might not even be a variance. So I wasn't sure at this point in time. Tim and I reviewed it. I think Tim said that it might be a better idea to take to this board and suggest either request for a variance or an interpretation that states that it's an accessory structure. The transparency code may not be necessary for a variance request.
Well, I guess we gotta clear that up, whether
Yeah,
that's,
but it's about that.
sure, go ahead.
I don't understand what that picture is. Is that supposed to be this new proposed covered bar area?
Yes, the front of it, the front, as you're looking from Main Street,
Yeah,
so
so,
looking from Main
Oh,
Street.
okay.
so looking from Main Street, you're seeing the wall, the back wall of the storage area,
Yeah,
the dumpster, and then there's actually some seasonal bathrooms that are gonna go in there. So you're gonna be looking at that brick wall with the dumpster enclosure right there, and then the iron gate, which basically creates the entrance to the back patio area.
So Tim, would you ever come to a conclusion?
I don't have it. That's what we were gonna kind of, I wonder if we should discuss, because even in talking with Chip, it's unclear. The problem with this whole project was the definition between primary building and an accessory structure. We did find, originally, we were planning on coming here with like 5 or 6 variances. And then found a section that the planning board, myself and Chip weren't aware of at the time regarding accessory structures. So we were able to label this an accessory structure. It is unclear in the design standard whether an accessory structure is still held to the same standards as a primary building facing Main Street. It's debatable. There's not a clear.
Chip,
Chip, you can chime in.
Chip, go ahead.
Yep, so this is, as Tim basically explained, I mean, I'm sorry?
I'm gonna adjust your volume. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I don't think there's much of a question, although, I mean, or I should state it this way, it's my opinion, because you guys are ultimately charged with the authority to interpret the zoning code. But I think that this structure that is being proposed, to me, sort of clearly falls under the definition of an accessory structure. What is unclear under the mixed use design standards, I think that this application has made somewhat, has highlighted, is it does not draw clear distinctions for most things for which design standards apply to accessory structures or only to principal structures. So the only thing, unfortunately, that is clear, I think, is because there is a specific provision that talks about 112-16B2K says accessory structures shall not be greater than 18 feet in height and shall be set back from any property line abutting a residential district boundary, a distance at least equal to the height of the structure. That's really the only thing that is prescribed in terms of design standards with respect to accessory structures. So the problem with that is then it leaves unanswered the question of, so all these other design standards that just talk about buildings, do those standards, and among those would be, the one that would potentially be triggered here is transparency. Does that apply to accessory structures? Because unfortunately, all the code says is with respect to the transparency requirement, which is in 112.16 F3. Let me get to the right place.
F3C.
3C is that all new or renovated commercial buildings with frontage on Main Street shall provide areas of transparent glazing equal to or greater than 70% of the wall area, blah, 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 blah. Doesn't say principal building, but, you know, I mean, might it be, to the extent I have an opinion on this, it doesn't seem to me that it was likely that the intent to impose a transparency requirement on accessory structures. And as I said, I do think this meets the definition of an accessory structure. But I do think that that issue is at least ambiguous in the code.
Well, I think the dilemma here is that I agree with you that, you know, based on the use and the occupancy of that structure, it's an accessory structure. The intent of the code in the district for transparency is for buildings that are principal uses that are up on Main Street to the street, and a high degree of transparency for buildings up at the sidewalk. Not for a building setback, and an accessory, who really contemplated in the code that we were gonna litter Main Street with accessory buildings along the street for the streetscape. I mean, the intent is that those are buildings that are mixed use, that have storefronts and a high degree of transparency. That's the purpose of it. So when you have an accessory use, it isn't, fortunately, right up on Main Street. I think I'd have a huge problem with this if it was right up at the right of way and right up against the sidewalk. Then I don't know that I really want people walking past it, looking inside to see a dumpster in there. That's not the intent. So I think it's pretty clear it's an accessory structure. I think it's set back. If there was a building up to the street, and in the future, if that, you know, over time, things change and a new building replaces this in some point, you know, who knows how many decades in the future it is, but if a building does get there and this were to stay where it is, it would clearly be in the rear and an accessory structure. I don't see it as being a huge problem to me where it is. And you know, and I agree with the presentation about, you know, the dumpster is really well enclosed. You know, where it's sitting now, it's a dumpster sitting outside, right next to a beer garden next door, right next to the patio behind this building. The idea that it's moved forward away from those uses and isn't fully enclosed in, you know, it's subjective, but I think, you know, most people would agree it's a fairly attractive structure as dumpster enclosures go. It's not bad. It's pretty good. So I don't know that I have a massive problem with this. So Chip, would we wait till our deliberations decide, make a, you know, vote on whether it would apply or not apply, or?
You could do that. You could determine that it doesn't apply, that you don't think they need a variance, or you could determine that they do, and then
Okay.
decide whether or not you want to grant it to them. I generally agree with sort of Bill's take on all of that, but I just want to point out that that it does, as I said, it sort of highlights a question of, because I mean, again, I don't think it was likely the intent to require the full panoply of architectural details and transparency and things for accessory structures. But I think it probably was the intent that you don't have accessory structures sort of up near the up front, but really the MU design standards actually don't really regulate, other than and maximum height and minimum setback from a residential boundary don't really say where you can put them. So it's one issue we may want to put a check mark on to look at in terms of this code as to whether actually we want to be more clear as to where and exactly how accessory structures should be regulated under this thing.
Right.
But that's for a future issue. I mean, that's not, you know, we just need to determine, and the only thing I will say from a legal perspective in terms of, to the extent this is ambiguous, I mean, it is true under New York state law that if to the extent you conclude it's ambiguous, that because zoning is a derogation of the common law, generally speaking, any ambiguities need to be resolved in favor of the property.
Okay, thank you. Dave, did you want to say something?
If I can, just to further comment on that. It is the design intent that the windows as shown on the rendering and in the drawings actually meet the 70%. The difficulty that came up in the planning board is because of the nature of what's going on behind them, we are blacking them out. Therefore, it's not transparency. So from an architectural standpoint, we are providing the 70% of windows. The challenge came, they're not transparent. Now, when we did the limestone lofts and we came up with the dilemma there where there was glass that needed to be established for the storefronts. And what we did is like a shadow box and did a display, and I think it worked out very well. We kept the windows, the design and the architectural detail. However, the task or the function going on beyond it were salon, massage rooms and stuff, and obviously transparency couldn't apply. This is very similar to that. We're putting the windows in, we're blanking them out because it's storage and a bathroom. But we're looking for the variance, but Tim and I talked about putting it in front of the board as a possible interpretation for future consideration for anything that Tim might have to make a determination on in the future. In our case, we don't care if it's a variance or interpretation. I think for Tim's understanding is he would like to know if it's an interpretation.
But the transparency refers specifically to the fenestration itself, right? So if you made it transparent, didn't black it out, couldn't you just use a window treatment on the inside? Blinds, something to that effect?
Once again, full transparency. I wanted to let the planning board know that we are going to be blanking it out. We're not going to have that so that you're looking into the storage room.
No, but it's the mechanism of how you're doing it.
That is
And
correct.
so if
once
the
again-
window's a window and you can see through it if the blinds are open, but the blinds are closed, there's nothing that I'm aware of in the code that would say if you've got an office building on Main Street, you're prohibited from having blinds on your window. No level, or is it you have to be able to see through it?
I agree. I agree. Once again, error on cautious side. We just wanted to make sure the planning board is who came up with the dialogue of this request. So out of respect for the planning board, we brought it in front of this board who makes the formal
Because
interpretation.
their intention is to black out.
Yes.
Yes, you're correct. They can put a curtain there if they would like to.
And I would just say, I do think we need to be concerned somewhat about, to the extent we're making an interpretation here, to say that that transparency requirement does apply, because notwithstanding the fact this is an accessory structure, that then, that means, somebody puts a shed in the MU, they may have to come here to get a variance for transparency. And so I do think, we have to be guided by the language of the code, but where there's an ambiguity, I think it's would be proper to try to make a ruling based on what we think the intent is. So
Chip, I think it's a question of aesthetics, and again, this is a subjective issue, and it's certainly the choice of the petitioner to put forth the application as they see fit. But to me, it's one thing to have full windows on a second floor or a third story in some lifestyle center where it's not, you know, a real occupancy up above, and so they have fake windows just to give it an architectural look from people walking on the street. This is at ground level. This is right where people are walking next to it. And I think the blacked out windows is gonna look, it's gonna be pretty obvious how phony it is. So I understand the purpose, I get all of it. And so I guess I'd ask, you know, what the architect's feeling is about how well it can be achieved architecturally, that will still look attractive, as opposed to what is, you know, more genuine, a real window with a window treatment behind it that's closed, and there's no question it looks a little bit more creative or a little bit more correct. But I think that, again, the idea is that it's not right up against the street. So if it was right up against the street, I'd have a big problem with this. But if it's set back behind a bunch of rows of parking and in the summertime, it's just, you know, outdoor music venue.
But based on what Chip said, it could be 5 feet, it could be 10 feet, it could be 20 feet off the property line, or off the front, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, so we can cover that if somebody else comes in with something.
So I think
That's not the case.
So I think at this point, we'll discuss this under our deliberations and we'll determine one way or the other whether this variance is required or not.
We still have to let the public have their shot.
One only thing before we get to the public again, just to clarify a couple of things that you said. You mentioned 2 spaces, and I count 5 spaces that are you're going to be deficient by 5 spaces.
I said we were eliminating 2 spaces.
Okay.
So the
But
deficiency.
they're already deficient.
Yeah, if you remember, several years ago, we came in front of the board and got a variance. And we are now eliminating 2 parking spaces, which is an alteration to an existing condition that was approved by this board. That's the 2 removal is the trigger as to why we're here.
So originally, are you talking about the variance that was granted for the outdoor seating in the summer? Is that what you're talking about? Or overall?
As you might remember, we've been in front of this board for several variances and different levels.
Yes.
And the latest of which was exactly what was approved and on the site plan, with the exception of the 2 spaces that we're eliminating as a result of the new and recent patio proposal.
So, yeah, Chairman Anderson, so what last time when they came they needed some variances when they sort of built out towards the front, towards the
Right.
street last time. And that created a parking deficiency and they were granted a variance for the current number of parking spots. They're essentially now seeking a further variance for the parking deficiency.
Okay, I guess I'm confused. There's existing 12 spaces. They're proposing 7. And I don't understand where they would have been if 12 was acceptable at the time that outdoor patio or the front patio was built. There's 12 spaces there. And the only thing I see is 8 spaces during the summer. And then they can delete the 2 spaces in the handicap where the outdoor patio is during the summer. That's the only thing I've seen that's any kind of a variance. I don't understand where if we've got 12 existing spaces, they want to go to 7. How does that get us?
So there's I mean, I don't know, I'll defer to Tim on that. He did the calculation, but
we
shouldn't, just because there were 12 spots doesn't necessarily mean they needed 12 spots. They may have been more.
That's why I asked, that was my first question. He said 12 are required.
Yeah.
Including with the new space.
Okay.
So the variance then would be 5 spaces. Is that correct, or am I
That's
misreading?
how I'm pulling up the previous variance here.
It was 8 and 4, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. Yeah, and to be clear, Tim has stated that 12 spaces are required.
Mhm.
That would require, that would be the requirement. And in my presentation, I don't want to misrepresent myself here. I was stating that we were eliminating 2 parking spaces. So the variance is from 12 to what we're proposing.
So you're taking,
From 12 to 7. You're going from 12 to 7.
We are asking a variance from 12 to 1, 2, 3, 4, and this could be 5, 6, 7, 8.
Well,
So you'd be-
It's 4.
you'd be
That
four
hash,
short.
That
For
hash
sure.
area couldn't be 5 because you need an unloading spot for the handicap.
If I move the handicap to
That's
here,
not what you're showing us.
Right.
Well, that's what he was saying earlier.
They've been talking.
If you wanted to budget
So-
that, you.
So we still need a variance for 4 now, at least 4.
We need a variance for 5.
5,
Unless we determine, you know, if you're gonna deny it, that's one thing. If you're gonna grant it, and you want to squeeze 5, I can make the determination.
Right.
The front entrance is no further away from that spot as the one in the, by the building. We could utilize that spot.
Okay,
as
so
a
I-
handicap spot.
So I was gonna ask this later, but over where the, against the building, why can't you take where the parking spot is right next to the building, make that handicap, the center one be this hashed off, the third one be the handicap, and that fourth one be a parking spot?
You mean going towards Main Street?
Right,
Well, the principal structure is
Here?
not that.
right,
accessory.
right there. Can that be, could that be a handicap? The center one be the next one down be the hash mark?
yes. So code only requires 1. We're actually showing 2 here because this is where it is during the
Summer, and
Winter
then,
months.
yes, winter months,
the
that's correct.
summer months. So.
Okay, so the code only requires 1.
Correct.
Okay.
But the
Alright.
question does still arise, which is why I put it in the denial. When they close it off in the summer, they're technically only gonna have the parking spaces that are on the side.
Okay, right. And we are looking for 5 space variance, regardless of the summer or winter. I know the winter or summertime would be less, but in the winter it would be 12 spaces. total.
Five.
By code.
The variance from what's required to what we're providing is 5.
Right, okay. And then the last thing I have, before we get into public comment, is it's a code question for Mr. Sutton, my question is, do you now have a second means of egress out of that area? It appears to me there's only one way out of there, because with the grand total of all this now, it's gotta be over 50. The occupancy,
Are you
isn't it?
talking about the patio?
Patio and the entire area,
So-
the entire seating area, there's existing pergola in the back, and there's
Yeah,
space.
so there's a rear exit in the building, which is a legal means of egress that goes to the public way. Okay, so that is established and maintained as a.
But
means of egress.
that swings inward?
No, it goes from the building.
Oh, yes, that was my, yes.
So the second means of egress, this is an open structure. We do have the opportunity, we're actually a 5-foot setback from the fence line.
Mhm.
And that can be a legal path, and this door would just swing the other way if that is determined by the building inspector that we need to do that.
Well, then my only question, if it's over 50, it is required. That's, Joe and I were put on here for the fire department, and that's one of our main concerns, obviously.
would-
Exiting and-
As we get through further in the review, we would acknowledge that as a legal path of exit, and we would not propose it for an opportunity for outdoor storage.
Because you can't get that, to me, it would throw the whole project out.
Correct.
You have people exiting the building plus everybody that's in that back area, so
Right.
you're looking at other means. Okay,
Today-
so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Today, our first step in this is to move forward on the 2 variances. And we would definitely make sure that we are compliant from a fire exit, architectural, all the compliance issues that need to go at consecutive steps from here.
They still have to go back to planning board for final approval also.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Now, I want to clarify this parking one, because my denial actually states that they supply 8 parking spaces in the winter, and they supply 4 parking spaces in the summer.
Presently,
No, that's what they're proposing. They're
Well, that's-
required to have 12 all the time.
Right.
So now planning board grants an outdoor seating permit separately. And they can grant a waiver for up to 50% approval, which is, I assume, is how you got the outdoor seating to close in the first place. So the planning board can do the same,
I'm sorry, Tim, go ahead.
planning board can do the same thing, but I almost feel like you need to grant a variance for more than. If they can do 50%,
Well, it doesn't matter at this point. The code's a code, whatever it says for parking, that's what we have, whether they want to vary that for
Right.
seating, that's their problem, not ours.
okay, I just want to make sure that you guys are. on
So
board.
right now, there's only proposed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 car spaces right now as we stand with the proposed project.
Yeah.
What's existing is 12.
We've
We've got
got
8, 7 across the back there, or 9 across the back, and then 3 in the front, across the front of the building. So so we've got 12 spaces, right?
So I'm still trying to understand how we went from
Exactly.
12 to 7 and we're only down 2.
Exactly,
only
that's
moved 2.
my question.
Yeah, well, I think this one here is not an actual parking spot. So there's 11 parking spaces and we are at 8. And we
Forget
are
the other handicap
suggesting that we could do another one,
Yeah, but
so.
I'm sorry, where is there 8? Because I count 4 on one side, 3 on another. And that to my calculations, that's 7.
Right, I keep referring to the one that I think we can get. Once again,
Right.
the variance is, one of the criteria, the variance is the least variance required. I am offering as the designer to add an additional parking space if the building inspector allows me to do that.
Are you
So,
prepared to make that decision?
and he did give me,
I talked about it with Tony, the distance to the main entrance
Almost
is
equidistant.
identical, so it does not.
It's not that, it's that this shows that on that striped area, if the handicap space moves to the right, up
Yeah.
against the storage area where it's also cross-hatched and striped.
Correct.
The illustrations show those as being planter boxes. So is that still a big enough aisle that meets the requirement for a handicap space? Or does it not?
It does.
It does, okay.
From what we've discussed, I mean, it would have to be if you guys approved it that way.
And then they just revise the drawing and show another parking space out closer to me. Okay.
Yes.
So we get
And
8,
that was
we're-
discussed with planning board as well. I mean, that's not a new.
so we're still shy by 4, still shy by 4. Even if we would get the 8,
Correct.
we're still shy by 4.
And sorry, I just want to jump in here. So Tim, I think I make sure I heard you, right, but the planning board cannot grant any sort of waiver with respect to number of parking spaces.
No, I mean, for their outdoor seating permit, don't they have the option to go up to 50%? That would drop them.
No. What the outdoor seating regulations say is that you don't count any areas used exclusively for seasonal outdoor seating in calculating how much parking they need. But there's no, the number of parking spaces, if the variance is required from that number, the only board that can grant that is the ZBA.
So for clarification tonight, if we granted this variance on the parking, because they're allowed to take away the 3 or 4 spots in the front for outdoor seating in the summertime, they're actually only going to be left with 4 spots or maybe 5 on the left-hand side.
Correct.
I think that's right.
That's why I worded it the way I worded it.
Right.
Because in the summertime, they are only gonna be offering 4 spaces.
Right. Okay.
Unless they choose not to close off that
Right.
parking lot. Which is up to the owner to decide that, right?
All right, so at this point, we will, I will ask if there's anyone in the audience or on Zoom that would like to speak in favor or in opposition to this variance or these variances. People on there, I'm not sure who they are.
One of them.
Somebody just, Matt, did you want to say something?
Am I allowed to say something?
You can say something. Or what?
Technically, yes. As a resident of the village, as a village trustee, probably not, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I would just offer that I find this suggestion challenging because I feel like even when I was a member of the zoning board, we were granting variances for this property in one form or another. And so I feel like I was kind of always under the impression professionally and as a zoning board member that, there were only so many times you could come back to the well. And in particular, parking on this parcel has always been a challenge. And it has always sort of been the fly in the ointment in every conversation. And it continually gets degraded. And I guess what I find most challenging is the idea of creating a permanent outdoor patio space, which current one exists on the front and a second one in the back. And then moreover, seasonally granting a third outdoor seating option in the parking lot, which has always been valuable and conflicted. So it just seems like, you know, it strikes me that if the argument is that this option, which I'm sure in practice would be lovely and enjoyable to experience, is about social distancing and the fact that the interior space is empty, but the exterior space is humming. But there's an assertion that the net quantity of patrons is not going to change. I find that hard to believe when you start to add up the number of tables in the front patio, number of tables in the new back patio, number of tables in the then expanded seasonal seating that's in the parking lot too. And it strikes me that it seems like the arithmetic of that just doesn't make sense. And I think, obviously, as I continue to find, as you guys know, over and over and over with these codes, the idea of parking by a square foot metric fails when that square footage isn't under a roof. And I think that's pretty evident in this scenario where, you know, it's probably easy to say that the net patronage won't increase on a day, but on the other hand, you know, the Irishman is a very popular, very successful establishment, a well-founded institution in the neighborhood, and it's well attended. And I think the more opportunities there are to attend it, the more people you will have attending. And I find it hard to believe that the patronage will not increase as a result. So that's my comment as a resident.
Debbie, would you mark that down as, that is citizen E2 speaking? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would like to speak in favor or opposition?
Yes, Gene O'Donovan, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Gene O'Donovan, I'm the owner of the Irishman, and I've been watching the meeting. I want to, first of all, thank you all for your diligent attention to our proposal. Just wanted to say a few things, and specifically with respect to kind of maybe an overall picture as to what we're trying to achieve there. And I, in particular, maybe responding to the last speaker. You know, parking as a business owner, parking, of course, is important. We want as much parking as we can get. It's also a double-edged sword. If you have more parking, you have less space for everything else. Our goal in doing this project is certainly not to reduce parking. That was not our goal and is not our goal. The reduction of a handful of spots in the village is incredibly minimal to our business. The fact that we have so much parking next door has always been our ace in the hole. And notwithstanding that there may be some other parts of the village or areas of the village that struggle with that. And certainly insofar as the fact that the outdoor versus the indoor is important in the summer, that really is a real thing. I think COVID has brought that even more to the fore. And sure, we want, as a business owner, I want as many customers as we can possibly get. The market in our business is very competitive, as you can imagine. We very much welcome our neighbors. Brightsmith have done a great job next door with no parking at all. Insofar as trying to be good neighbors, we want to continue to do that. But our goal is very much just to give our customers another alternative. In Buffalo, in this area, in Williamsville, it's a great village. In the summertime in particular, there's a lot of walking customers. And we want to give them an opportunity to really enjoy the outdoors and enjoy the view of the creek. I think from a business, from a building aesthetic standpoint, one of the probably the weaknesses of what we have done and what we have so far is a lack of storage space. When talking with Dave about this, we worked very hard to make sure that we build plenty of storage space so that everything that needs to be stored is stored behind closed doors in a very attractive structure. And that's really part and parcel of what we're all about here and what we're trying to do. So again, I very much appreciate your attention to this and thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak in favor or opposition?
I'm not speaking in favor or opposition, but I also just want to clarify one thing. That the code does not, and I don't think this matters here because I think Tim included this space in his calculation, my understanding, but what the code says is off-street parking spaces shall be provided at a minimum of 1.5 spaces per 1,000 square feet of non-residential leasable area. Now it's different for resident. It doesn't necessarily need to be inside of a building, at least the way I read it.
All right. At this point, I will reiterate that we did have a letter from the plastic surgeons that own property next door and property across the street. And then we also did receive a telephone call from the owner of Ed Young's, and those both were in opposition. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak in favor or opposition?
That makes some.
Seeing none, we can, yes, if
Can I
you would like
make
to
a closing comment? Because Gene is with us here this evening and the input that I've received for this board, I'm wondering if there might be an opportunity if Gene is amicable to it. It's about quality of the space. It's about taking advantage of the view. I'm wondering if Gene would be willing to consider not doing these patio seating on the blacktop of the parking spaces in lieu of the presentation that we're presenting in front of you, because I think there's a great opportunity. And if that's the case, then the 4 parking spaces that are closed off, or 3 parking spaces that are closed off, might be available on a year-round and summer basis also. And once again, we take advantage of the view, we take advantage of the storage, we take advantage of an upgrade of the dumpster, some covered patio seating toward the back, towards the creek. And in replace of that, we might be eliminating a blacktop patio with the tables on it. I don't know if Gene, if you want to agree with me or disagree. I don't want to overstep my bounds, but if there's a concern truly about parking in the summer because of this, I think the ideal of the summer is people don't mind walking a little bit. There's more than ample parking here, as long as they're directed to park in a municipal lot. So my preference would be to get the whole, the project approved as submitted, but that might be a concession that we might be able to offer if Gene is agreeable to it.
So it's up to me. Is that what you're saying, Dave?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I need to verify I'm not overstepping my.
Yeah,
bounds.
no, of course. I'm joking, and I apologize for my levity.
Before you answer that,
Say that again.
before you answer that question,
Yes.
Chip, I want to make sure I'm perfectly clear on your comment about off-street parking for establishments in the village. And the parking ratios being that the off-street parking simply needs to be off-street. It doesn't need to be on premises. Is that what you just said?
I didn't say that, but that's a true statement. But if
So the municipal lot, which I guess the question becomes, what's the allocation? But if it's off-street parking, it isn't expressly dedicated to this establishment, but it's being utilized that way. So on some level, you'd be able to say there's really not a variance even necessary because the off-street parking requirement has been met with off-street parking not on premises, that's public parking.
I believe the code requires, although I'd have to double check this, that the applicant is able to show that they have control over those spaces,
Okay,
whether they're on their property or not. And a private applicant can't control the municipal lot, obviously. Actually, and neither does the village for that matter. It's a town lot, but and there are provisions in here about shared parking and agreements for that sort of thing. But the code, I don't think explicitly, certainly doesn't explicitly allow an applicant to rely on publicly owned parking. Maybe it should, but I don't think it does right now. That doesn't mean that's not a legitimate thing for you to consider. I mean, all applications, the whole reason, why people tend to justify applications for variances is because they think there are unique circumstances that justify it. And I certainly don't think there would be any problem if the board were so inclined. I'm not saying you have to conclude this, but I think it would be perfectly reasonable to conclude that for this, if a property does have access to ample public off-street parking, that is clearly could be a mitigating factor in reducing the need, the substantial nature of that variance and affect that balancing test, which is, I mean, Dave Sutton is correct in describing the area variance as, as a balancing test. The availability of public off-street public parking, or for that matter, even if there was a record establishing there was ample on-street parking, even though it is an off-street parking requirement, that would also be a legitimate. Now that may not actually be the case, but at any rate, that's a long, somewhat equivocal answer to your question, Bill.
So for those of you that are on Zoom and aren't here, today obviously St. Patty's Day, and the lot out here, this municipal lot, is chock full. Matter of fact, many of us had to walk quite a long ways to get here to park. And so, I mean, and then obviously I'm not saying it's all Irishmen, but it could be any of the other places, but obviously when there's a town board meeting or a village volunteer fire department has a drill this evening, parking's at a premium. So you can't see it from obviously where you are, but it was a problem tonight, this evening, for us to get in here.
And their levels.
So at this point, I'm going to ask if any of the members want to ask the applicant any questions. We'll start with Bill Time. As long as you were rolling there, keep rolling.
I think I understand what's in front of us, so I don't think I really have any questions.
Very good. Mr. Freeze.
Yes, sir. It's no secret that I'm against the parking rules and regulations in the village. I personally believe the requirement of Irishmen and all other restaurants and businesses in the village to say, use the municipal parking lot. It's also no secret that the town, on many occasions since I've been there for 16 years, have talked about moving to different locations, whether it have been the mother house at that time or centralize all facilities at 500 John James Audubon Parkway. This can be sold in a heartbeat. And when that's sold in a heartbeat, so is the so-called municipal lot. So I don't believe that we should rely on the parking that's available in a public parking situation to equal or to meet your requirements. I said from the beginning with this property that I felt that this was overdeveloped many years ago, that I felt it was overdeveloped. And I think this is even more so at this point. You said you weren't increasing seating, but I counted 21 seats in the back, and now we're making concessions about possibly eliminating that. And that's not including what's at that bar. I can't even imagine how many are at that bar. Now, I know there's no requirements for that, but people are actually physically seated. And if they're actually physically seated in this facility, they have to have a place to park, because everybody says the reason why we have that parking requirement in the village is to make it a walkable community. Hello, folks. This isn't just because of St. Patrick's Day. These parking lots are full constantly every day, starting at 11 o'clock. I watch the Irishmen and Wright Smith's employees park all over the town parking lot, even where it says restricted for 30 minutes, and they go to work for 8-hour shifts. It's not a good situation. I am not a proponent to lose any parking spaces. And to be perfectly frank with you, it's a great concept. It looks good, as Dave Sutton does all the time. He thinks of the village, he thinks of the aesthetics. But I think we were at our limit a couple of constructions ago. So that's my feeling.
Okay, thank you. David, I just have one question on the building itself. There's a dumpster enclosure, and there's a grease enclosure. How do they get that grease dumpster out of there?
They're actually in drums and there's doors accessed from the back.
Yeah, but you have to take it through take it through the regular area.
Well, in actuality, we're eliminating the wall between the.
Oh, you are,
dumpster, was
okay,
G,
okay,
But the idea is they actually come with a
Right,
hose.
right.
or something.
let's suck it back on, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that was the only question I had. I've asked you all my other questions. Ms. Fulwell, you have anything for the applicant?
No.
Mr. Celeste?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Mr. Sutton, is there anything else you want to finalize?
I'd like to thank this board for the time. I understand the questions, the concerns. But I would like to support the fact that, yes, we are trying to present a walkable community. I can say that at least my conversations with Tim and like the neighboring property, the Brightsmith had a very successful year last year on their beer garden, which is very similar to this project in terms of its offering. And Mr. O'Donovan feels that it's an excellent opportunity to complement it. My conversations with Tim suggest that there was no formal complaints of parking as a result of any occurrences last year. And I would suggest to you that the parking is not necessarily increasing as an outdoor seating. It's really substituting the indoor seating, and it's giving them more of an offering. So the idea, Mr. Freeze, I'm not suggesting that there's not additional seating out there. What I am suggesting is when those seats are being occupied, the inside is pretty much empty. And everybody knows that. On a nice day, everybody wants to sit outside. So I really do respect the board's comments, and I'm hopeful that you'll see that the benefits of this opportunity far outweigh the detriments of losing a couple of parking spaces.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, I'm going to close the public hearing and we will deliberate. We will have an answer for you this evening. Welcome to stick around.
Thank you.
Okay, I would like to entertain a motion.
I guess the question is whether or not if
Well,
the accessory use.
Yeah, let's probably do that
And
first.
whether or
Yeah,
not we have a different
okay.
interpretation.
Let's do that first, Bill.
I think
so
that makes
we'll-
sense to treat that, to address that issue first.
Okay, so we
And I think the question is whether or not the transparency requirement in section 116 or 112.16
12:16
F3C.
applies to accessory structures.
So I would like to handle it this way, if it's okay with you, Chip, that we don't make an interpretation, but we would say whether it applies or doesn't apply to this particular situation.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay.
Really, it's up to you guys as to how you think it's the appropriate way to
Because I don't wanna
resolve
make
that
it-
question.
I don't want to blanket it across the board, because if, like Bill said, if this thing all of a sudden appears up on Main Street, then obviously we got problems with it.
Yeah, no, right. And that's why I was saying, I do think, Matt knows, we've got a sort of running checklist going of things that need to be
Right.
corrected in all sorts of parts of the code. And I think that we definitely need to address some issues with accessory structures. We just have been lucky that there really haven't been many accessory structures, I think, constructed in such a visible fashion, I guess, so far under the design standards. But at any rate, I
Okay,
think
so
what you're proposing.
I'll ask for a motion then that we, I guess we word it in the affirmative, right? And then vote against it if we felt. So a motion that the transparency ruling under that section 112-16 F3C in this particular case does not apply, or does apply, and then we can rule, vote against it, whatever.
I'd make that motion.
Okay, motion made by Mr. Tyne, second by Mr. Celeste. On the question, does everyone understand what we're voting on? So if you vote no, obviously you think it doesn't apply in this case. If you vote yes, you think it does apply. Debbie, did you understand the resolution? She with us?
You're
Debbie?
you're muted, Deb.
Debbie, did you understand? Did you
Hi.
understand the resolution?
Yes, okay, let me read it back. That in this particular case, the temporary ruling in this particular case, I'm sorry, not temporary, transparency ruling in this particular case applies.
Okay.
Of section 112-16 F3C.
That's correct. Thank you. Okay, would you call the roll, please?
And that was on motion by Mr. Tyne, seconded by Mr. Celeste.
That's correct.
Okay, and
To be clear,
Roll
that
call.
I want to make sure we understand it all the way, that if we vote yes, we're saying that the transparency rule does
Does
apply.
apply. Correct.
Very good.
does apply.
Correct. If we vote yes.
Okay. We have Mr. Freeze,
Yes.
Mr. Tyne,
No,
Ms. Fullwiler,
Yes,
was that a yes?
yes, sorry.
Mr. Celeste
Yes.
and Mr. Andrews?
No. So it passes 3-2. Okay, the next
So
question
now,
is,
now right, so now you have to determine whether or not you want to grant a variance.
correct. Okay, so now so now you mean the two variances now?
Well, I think you could take them one at a time. No, this is a third variant, right?
But
So,
I mean, not that variance for that particular issue. That's done now, right? The transparency doesn't apply.
no,
You said it doesn't
you've only
apply.
determined that it applies. Now
No,
they're
no,
seeking
you-
relief from that, right?
Oh, okay, understood. Yep. Understood. Okay, so I need a motion that a variance be granted for that transparency, which would be the same thing, section 112-16 F3C. When now we have to grant the variance for the transparency. And that, I need a motion on that.
so moved.
Moved by Mr. Tyne,
I'll second it.
second by Mr. Freeze. On the question?
Mr.
Everyone
Andrews,
understand?
could you
Yes.
could you please repeat? that?
Okay, so
It's
We're now-
essentially, oh, sorry.
granting the variance to the section.
Or allow him to put the accessory structure back as far as it is instead of bringing it up front.
No, nope.
Right.
Right, no,
That's all it is.
the relief that's being sought is that they do not need to provide 70% transparency between three, I don't have the code provision.
That's a variance requirement they're requesting, right?
Right.
Right, okay. So does everyone understand, if you vote yes on this, you're granting a variance from the transparency rule. If you vote no, you're not accepting it. So they have to come up with some other way of doing it. And we'll ask for the clerk to call the roll, please.
Okay, so I understand the motion. It's a motion to grant a variance from the transparency rule.
Correct.
Okay, we have Mr. Freeze.
Yes.
We have Mr. Tyne,
Yes,
Ms. Fullwiler,
No,
Mr. Celeste,
yes,
and Mr. Andrews.
I vote no again. So it does pass 3-2, so that variance has been granted. Now we move on to the parking variance, 112-16 D4I. And the variance is for 5 parking spaces. Presently, they have 12, which is required by the building code official, and they are proposing 7. Is that correct?
Proposing 8, because we're gonna add the 1. However,
I mean, we
in the
don't know.
discussion we had, if they're gonna continue to use the front patio, close down the floor, I think you have to grant them to
Four.
have 4.
Okay, can you clarify that for me? It's a motion to grant,
Variance on parking,
So for
section 112, 16D, 4I. And actually, I don't know who put that.
you would be granting a variance of reducing the parking requirement by 8. In the summertime, whether you make it seasonal or not, I think you have to grant the extreme.
Well, that's what they're applying for. Of course, what the village law requires is you could, of course, deny the variance outright. But if you grant a variance, the New York State Village Law also requires you to grant the minimum variance necessary that will confer the benefit sought by the applicant. So I'm just pointing that out that you could, there's a couple different options here. You could deny the variance, you could grant the variance as they've requested it, or you could grant them less of a variance than they've sought.
Okay, now based on what Tim is telling us about that extra space, that we could take that in consideration.
Yeah, you could, I mean, so for instance, for example, in my mind, the way this would work, if you were to say, nope, we're not going to give you a variance for a reduction of elimination, an 8 parking spot deficiency, but we'll grant you one for 7, then he's gonna have to figure out how to get another spot in there, and that may be to move that handicap spot, which I think he indicated he could do.
Right.
If you said he has to provide, either the full amount, obviously that's, then they can't do anything. Or if you said another spot, I don't know, they'd have to figure something out. It's up to you to figure out how much, if any, of a variance on the parking you're willing to grant them.
Okay, so I'm looking for a motion that will grant the variance for the parking under 112-16D4I and that was an agreement where they would cut out the 3 spaces. They wouldn't, in the summertime, they would allow those 3 spaces.
Well, we never got Mr. Donovan to answer that
We
question.
certainly could make it as a condition too.
Like I said, that's up to you. Like Chip's saying, if you tell them you're gonna grant 8 spots, they need to supply 8. Then they have to decide whether or not they want to do that or not. That's your option. Or we can ask him if he wants to close it, or you can grant him to 4 in the summertime. That's like, you have kind of a wide way to do
So
this.
we're granting them a variance of X number of spots so that they must provide at least 8 or 7. That's the way we're.
Well,
That's-
it depends if it's a
it's up to
seasonal
you.
or not.
They're required to
Right,
have
right.
12. They're proposing 8 as is.
Right,
If they close down the 4 in the front, or 3, however you want to call that,
during the summer.
they're gonna be down to 1, 2, 3, 4, they're gonna be down to 5 spaces. If they close off this thing in the summertime.
Right,
So you need to either grant them 5, grant them 6, 7, 8, like Chip's saying, you can choose the number.
well, we could also put a condition, depending on whoever wants to make the motion, we could also put a condition that the summertime spots were basically overriding the variance we granted. Is that true, Chip?
You muted, Chip.
Yes, you can put a condition on there that as long as it's rationally related to trying to mitigate any impacts of granting the variance. And so yeah, if you're asking whether you can sort of dictate seasonal, putting parking spots back in service seasonally, I think that would be a perfectly legitimate condition. If the
All
board
right,
were
so
so inclined to do that.
I need a motion. We're basically going from 12 spaces that are required by the building code official down to 8, which is a variance of 4. That 8th position is going to be negotiated between the building inspector and the developer. It's not on the plan, but that would be the 4th or 8th spot that would be negotiated. So that's the motion we're looking for, with the condition that the 3 spaces that are adjacent to the building be maintained in all year round. Does that sound right?
I would prefer that,
Jimmy,
and I
you
would
can
make a
propose-
motion, I would make a motion that we approve it with a reduction from the existing 12 to 8 spaces in the seasonally in the winter months, and we approve the reduction to 5 in the summer months.
I'm sorry, you're right.
Summer months, okay. You want to make, there's a motion on the floor.
Can
Debbie,
you
did you get
repeat
that?
We should just, if that's gonna be the motion, again, may not, but we should define what we mean by those months.
Well, just have it match the outdoor seating permits, because.
That's a good idea, Tim. That's a good idea. Yep.
They expire March 15th, they're granted. Or they get the March 15th, they expire in November.
Okay, Deb, did you get that?
No, I didn't. Can you repeat that in its entirety, please?
I move that we approve a variance to reduce the parking from the existing 12 spaces seasonally in the non-outdoor seating months to 8 spaces. And in the winter, in the summer season, when the outdoor seating permits are issued, that can be further reduced to 5 spaces.
And I guess the seasonal months, do we want to define those?
I did by the outdoor seating requirements.
They're gonna match, because
Okay,
the outdoor
okay,
seating permits are
okay,
granted
understood.
for a time period.
Very good. Do we have a second on that motion?
Hang on. Let's just make the record clear here, okay? So just hang on one second. So those months are, okay, a seasonal outdoor permit, the season basically as defined by the code is,
Can't we just say seasonal as defined by the code?
Well,
yeah, but let's just get it, in there. Where the heck are the dates? Okay.
Let's try to get an answer before we need a permit to go outside.
Sorry, I thought this would be quicker to look up.
Can it be-
The permits are issued on or after March 15th and expire on the last Sunday in November.
Wow,
That's 3/4 of the.
wow.
We're in the seasonal outdoor seating season.
Get St. Patrick's Day in there somehow.
Yes, that's right.
Welcome to Florida of the North.
Okay, did you get that, Deb? Those dates?
March through November?
March 15th through the last Sunday in November.
Sunday. Okay, do I have a second for that motion?
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Fullwiler. Clerk, please call the roll.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So I want to explain a little bit on why I feel this way about it. I think most of the board members are very much aware of my feeling on no parking minimums in village settings and trying to incentivize pedestrian activity. I think it's also something that should be recognized that especially during the outdoor seating months, that it's, and especially on a Thursday night with music on Main Street, it's pretty obvious that people are parking their car and then are walking all over the place, and they're visiting more than one establishment. They are not parking at one place, using off-street parking for that location and then going home. They're parking and going all over the place. So the Brightsmith next door has, I think, 4 spaces for the entire Brightsmith, which has a significant amount of space indoors and a larger patio, probably, maybe not collectively between now with this revised plan, but they have a pretty good outdoor beer garden over there as well. The Scharfs have sent us a letter saying that they get to use, and they have a commitment to not just simply the Brightsmith, but also to share And I think they said Morpad as well, if I recall. So they're allowing their parking space to be utilized for multiple establishments, which is their right, and they've done that by contract, it sounds like. But I don't think there's any requirement that anybody that visits the Morpat is then prohibited from walking across the street and going to the Irishman. And I dare say a lot of people do that. And so I think the idea that people, that's what we're looking for, is park once. That's actually a policy in places like Pasadena, California. That's the name of the public policy, park once. And so the idea that we get people to park once and then get out and walk and visit multiple establishments and see a lot of pedestrian activity on the sidewalks and see a vibrant community, which is good for all of the businesses, I am all for that. And so for that reason and many others, I am fully in support of this, and I want to promote this activity. And I'd like to see that those spaces out in front that are right now in the parking lot that are being used seasonally, that I don't want to see that outdoor area diminished and make those permanent spaces so that we have then a reduced patio out front in those outdoor months when people are craving that outdoor experience, and it's really lending to the vibrancy of the village of Williamsville and the success of the village of Williamsville. And maybe the owner of the establishment won't be happy about this, but the more value we add to this business, then maybe we'll start seeing things that have better assessed valuation, because and successful businesses that are able to fully participate in a collaborative effort with the municipal government and with their businesses as well. We're all in this together. So for those reasons, and as I said, many more, I am in full support of this motion.
Okay, anyone else on the question? The clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Freeze,
No.
Mr. Time,
Yes.
Ms. Fullwiler,
No,
Mr. Celeste,
No.
Mr. Andrews,
No. If the variance is denied 4-1, for formality's sake, I guess we go on to the third variance, which is dumpster location. That is section 112.16C2E. Do I have a motion to grant that variance?
we don't know where it is.
Exactly, so the
Well-
point with it's still under the existing variance request.
It's already non-conforming, because it's in a side yard.
Right,
So if you, I don't know, if you wanted to put an exact limit on it, yes, we would need to know that answer. But
But they
basically,
could,
you basically could grant,
they could relocate it.
if you want to grant that they could relocate it to the side yard no closer than X amount, you could do that, or we have them that. But I think for time's sake, if they want to redesign the project and go back to planning board, if you could make a decision on this, it'd be better for the applicant.
I'll ask the applicant, Mr. Sutton, would you want us to rule on this tonight, or would you want to come back with something maybe?
I would like you to rule on it. I also would like you to consider my offer of the elimination of the seasonal seating on the blacktop, to consider that as a reduction to the variance request for the parking.
Don't we agree that that has to be formalized
Yeah, that
and
would
put
have to-
down so that we can actually?
That'd have to be resubmitted, right? Tim?
I mean, I put it in both ways, so. The denial is written, because I knew this would come up, because seasonal outdoor seating is governed by planning board. So it,
Right.
again, they do need the variance for 4 as proposed, but they don't have to put that in. They can grant 8 parking spaces. I don't know if that would change anybody's decision, but they can physically grant 8. If you, or supply 8, I'm saying, if you want to grant 8, but that's up to the board.
Yeah, I'm not saying the board has to. If the board wants them to reapply for that variance, that's okay. But I don't think that
Can they
that's
not apply for-
legally.
They can apply for a year.
I don't think that that's legally mandatory. I mean, if they are modifying, I mean, look, we published notice. Everyone is aware that they're seeking a reduction in the parking. If they are now seeking less of a reduction in the parking and the board wants to entertain that, the board can entertain that. You don't have to, but you can.
What's your feelings, folks?
For time's sake, from talking with the applicant, I would request that we at least vote on it tonight. Because they would like to go to planning board
Vote on what?
next, vote on the
Dumpster?
8, vote on the 8.
Oh, on it.
Why don't we table this so that he doesn't have to wait a year? He can come back with a revised drawing so that we can see something.
But I'm saying
That-
you're.
That's
you're voting-
absolutely fine suggestion too, Joe.
Motion that we table this variance
All right,
for further information and further design consideration.
all right, motion by Mr. Freeze, second by Ms. Fullwiler. On the question. Clerk, please call a roll.
This is to table this item.
Yeah, to table to table the entire
Yeah,
application.
they're tabling the rest of the application.
Okay, we have Mr. Freeze,
Yes.
Ms. Fullwiler,
Yes.
Mr. Celeste,
Yes.
Mr. Tyne,
We're going to conclusion now, yes.
Mr. Andrews.
Yes,
Motion to table, carried.
okay. All right, so next month we bring back the application. Now, to clarify that, Chip, that would be an application to move the dumpster and he's going to delete some seating, I guess.
I guess I'm not, I mean, obviously that design was all premised on the overall design of this thing. I'm not exactly, I have to be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure what exactly is being sought simply with, I guess, just not allowing them to have the dumpster further up than the code otherwise requires, right?
Right.
But as for what the exact measurement,
It's not conforming now, so that's what Tim was saying.
I mean, I just don't know as a practical matter that without a parking variance, which again, you're under no obligation to grant, but without that, I'm just not sure that the dumpster can be moved to where they're proposing because that's a parking spot now, right? I mean,
Well, he could redesign the entire thing.
to me, look, the application's been tabled. I think that let Dave and his client figure out whether there's anything that they can do and whether that, if they come back with just those 3, I suppose, or if what they're going to come back with is simply to restore those parking spots that are now currently seasonally used in front, and then would keep that dumpster there, then sure. If they're pretty confident that's what they're going to do, then you could rule on that request to put that dumpster where they're proposing to put that dumpster.
All right, okay. Very good, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, we have a second hearing this evening. 5601 Main Street. I'm going to read the items that are in the file. There's a ZBA application dated February 14, 2021. A permit denial letter from the code enforcement officer, a legal notice published in the Amherst Bee on March 10th, a list of and letter to notified neighbors, a letter to the applicant announcing the hearing, and the agenda. No, sorry.
You're good. We're far enough away.
So,
We're back here.
I just ask that if all of you are going to speak, that you just take the microphone and pass it out so people can hear.
and just state your names before you speak. And now, we're going to ask, obviously, anyone on the Zoom if they want to speak in favor or in opposition. And we do have a formality of reading the formal announcement in the newspaper. You can waive that if you'd like. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, please begin your procedure, your
All right,
presentation.
Jeff Kletzer, partner with Stiglitz and Other Architecture. Here on behalf of 5800 Main Street, joined by Tracy Hurley, one of the building owners, William the resident, and Tom Hurley, counsel for the Hurleys as well. Emmett Hurley is the other owner of the property. Property is currently a eye doctor office. It formerly also was occupied by a lawyer's office. The building was split. At this time, the lawyers have vacated the property and Dr. Hurley's gonna take over the rest of the building. As part of that, he wants to just update the facade of the building. We're not doing anything other than updating the facade of the building and then redoing some of the interior office space. Today, we're here due to a front yard setback requirement. So to be clear, the building is existing. The owners would like to modernize the facade. There'd be no changes to the actual building footprint itself. The current setback for the building, which is at the corner of Main and Academy, is 57 feet. The actual setback requirement for a new structure would have been 10 feet. Obviously, this is an existing building. Here's the existing facade here. We're not changing the fenestration to the building, but we'll be basically updating the upper portion of the building and basically facade improvement project. I think if you know the building, it's pretty undesirable looking at the top there. So this we feel is going to look a lot better on Main Street.
I just wanted to explain with the expansion and the necessary parking. Dr. Hurley is an oculofacial plastic surgeon. So he does plastic surgery around the eyes. He is the only one in Erie County and Niagara County. So his demand has increased significantly. Dr. Schaefer, who is further down on Main Street, recently retired in October. So he has taken on all of his patients as well. So currently we have 8 people that are employed by us, and we do plan to increase our staff as well. And the amount of patients that he's seeing has significantly increased. It is primarily medical. About 90% of his practice is, cancers, eyelid turning inward, outward, causing vision issues. And so a lot of these patients do have vision problems. So pulling into the parking spaces and being able to get in and out easily is important, because any type of obstructions, we are concerned, a lot of these people do have vision, especially peripheral vision issues. So, yeah.
And as far as that parking comment, we're proposing no changes to our parking. We same number of parking spots. We're not going to change anything. And that increase of people coming in for his use is probably offset by the water use that was there. Hopefully.
Anything else? Was that? Could you just, did you receive that five criteria there?
Yeah, I think we answered it.
Yeah, I think they're already. Didn't see them.
No, I wasn't sure.
I don't see them in the.
Yeah, I know we answered. I know they're in the budget. That's what I said. Will there be any undesirable change to the neighborhood? I would say no. We're actually improving the look of the building. We're not doing any other changes to the parking situation. Would the method achieve the unfeasible to correct benefits sought by applicant can be achieved by some method feasible to applicant to pursue? I would say that's unfeasible that we could meet the setback requirement. Whether the request is substantial, I would again say it's not. We're improving the facade and we're not changing anything else to do with the property. Whether it will have an adverse effect on the physical environment, again, no change to the existing parking lot. And whether the alleged difficult situation was self-created, again, I would say no. Our goal here is to make the building look better, as opposed to what the condition is right now, which really needs a facelift. I'll close on that for questions.
Okay. Thank you. This time I'm going to ask if anyone in the audience or on Zoom would like to speak in favor or opposition to this variance. Okay, seeing none, I'll ask if any of the board members will start with Mr. Celeste. Do you have any questions for the applicant?
No questions at this time.
Ms. Fuller?
No question.
Mr. Freeze?
No questions.
Mr. Tyne?
No question.
Okay, very good. Is there anything you'd like to add before we go into deliberation?
I just wanted to mention, Steve Goodwin, who's right adjacent to us, did call the office and said he received your letter and he fully supports our remodeling. And if we had any questions, we could reach out to him and get anything in writing. There was also a woman, one of our staff members, she came into the office to let us know that she also wanted to know what we were doing and said that she would support as well, but unfortunately they didn't get her name, but she said she was right adjacent to the building. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Okay. This time we will close the public hearing. And I just have one question for Tim before we go on. Tim, so according to this permit denial, you state that the building does comply with most of the standard compliance standards?
Yes, so what happens in this case is that the design standard dictates that when you change more than 200 square feet of the building facade,
Right.
you have to comply.
Mhm.
So then you have to look at everything. So it has the 2 stories as required. Side yard setback complies, rear yard setback complies, off-street parking complies, building height complies.
Parking, everything else.
Everything complies
Good.
except for the front yard setback.
Okay.
So that unfortunately it triggers the move to the street, but that's the only one it would trigger. Everything else is compliant.
But isn't the new
Does that
requirement?
include- Is it 15, is the first floor 15 feet?
Yes, it is. It's over.
Okay.
And the parking is required to be in the side or the backyard?
Well, here's
Yes.
the in the
I'm
code.
sorry.
It is required to be in the rear. However, they're not technically adjusting their site plan. Like, if you grant the variance, they're not doing a site plan alteration. So, yes, you're correct, but no, because they're only doing architectural changes.
So if we deny this variance, then they have to supply the parking on the side.
Gotta go through.
No, if you deny the variance,
They gotta pick the building. and move it
they'll
up to the sidewalk.
proceed,
Over to the front.
or they'll proceed with the
Yeah.
interior innovation, then you get rid of this.
Right.
But I'm just saying, technically, if we deny the variance, they move it up to the front and.
Yeah,
would
if
have
parking on
you
the side.
deny it, their options are do 200 square feet and leave it where it is,
Yeah.
move the building.
Do absolutely nothing. Stay under the 200 square feet.
200 square feet is gonna get you almost nothing.
Right.
So,
Or do nothing.
or do
So
nothing.
primarily it's a front yard setback.
It's a front yard setback.
Okay.
But to the point, what's in the front yard setback now is a parking lot. So,
It is a
so
parking.
that parking would essentially have to be removed and replaced with a building that complies with the design requirement,
Unless they grant the variance.
Right. The only-
unless they grant the variant, right. Well, yeah, obviously.
The only element of this that I would question is the interpretation that it also meets the requirement for 2-story and the 15 feet for the first floor. I mean, that's not exactly what I would call a 2-story building. It has a little tiny
But it
front.
has 2 usable stories.
And the first floor on the portion that has 2 levels is not 15 feet.
Unfortunately, that's his interpretation.
Yeah.
Can't really-
Yeah.
can't really-
I mean, when you look at the
Unless-
first floor on the right side, on that side where the numbers are, it's like 18 feet, I want to say, correct?
I get it, I understand.
The left side has, unfortunately, it does not specify 2 usable stories, the length of any structure. It says 2 usable stories. They have that. That's the letter of the law.
That's your-
I have no
that's your
way.
interpretation. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So this section here.
I get it. I don't think it meets the spirit of what the ordinance is.
I don't disagree with you necessarily. However, when I read it,
Is the trustee still with us, Mr. Etu? Looks like he
it's
is. Okay, this will be down the
Yep.
road. We'll have this because I want to ask him a question about this.
Yep.
This-
Go ahead, Chairman.
Yeah, I just had a question. I mean, we'll bring it up later also, but, obviously, we've talked about this 200 square foot threshold that's been, and then I hope that's something you're considering in your new guidelines. Revamp.
Add it to the list, Rick.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I also want to clarify something. So what the code says, and Bill, your point's well taken, but, and I do think that this is I agree with you on the intent, but the code says new building construction and additions along Main Street or any intersecting street shall be a minimum of 2 usable stories. This is not new building construction and it's not an addition. However, again, if the building has to be moved or an addition put on the front of it to comply with the setback requirement, that new construction would have to be a minimum of 2 usable stories.
So Chip, do we have to issue both these variances for the fact that the whole building has to comply and that it has to?
No, I don't. I mean, look, Tim's interpretation was that, and I agree with him, because what I just said is they're not proposing new building construction.
Oh, understood.
So I think if you grant the variance from the front yard setback, then they're not going to be proposing any new building construction or additions. So therefore the 2 stories. However, if you deny the variance and they want to go ahead with something to improve that property, then they're going to have to comply with this.
Chip, can we not just, is it not possible to grant a variance from the requirement in the code, 200 square feet as the threshold, the metric that puts it into this? Because to me, that's the fundamental issue. So we have a code.
I don't.
To bring buildings up to the design standards that we want to see in the MU district. That's the goal. And we're trying to say that if you make significant changes to that building, we want you to bring it into full compliance and meet the spirit of what we're trying to achieve with a streetscape along Main Street. Now, the reverse, or the other side of that is that we're disincentivizing people to make improvements to their buildings. Because they're not doing major reconstruction here. They're just doing some facade improvements.
That's the tension, but that's the way the code is written, and that's what's triggering the variance. No, my answer to your question, Bill, is I think you could grant them a variance from it, but I don't think you can say you can vary the trigger for the need for a variance. That's essentially rewriting the zoning code.
Right. So we do grant them the variance, that the only variance that the building inspector has come up with is 112.16B2C, the setback. Okay.
Well, now, let me ask a question though. What about all the parking standards? What about screening? What about curbed islands and interior green space?
I think that would all come into play with a moving. Again,
No.
Me and Chip talked about this for like an hour.
Well, no.
If they don't do anything, they're not triggered to do it. So therefore,
hang on. So I'm not. We got to look at the triggers
for the building to come in the code.
Because if you say it's denied and you say they have to move it, if they decide to move it, then yes, everything applies. If they decide to do nothing, I can't make them do anything.
Well, right, but there's a middle ground there, Tim, and I think both you and Mr. Tyne are correct. So to Bill's point, this was meant to be an improvement measure that was, meant to not just let someone go out there and swap out, vinyl siding for clapboard siding and walk away and never really address the site features, because the site features are as much a part of the property as the building is, right? And that this design guideline was not just building standard, but site standard. It is irrational to assume that short of the desire to actually expand their footprint, that an individual who is going to update their facade is also going to pick their building up and relocate it. And it would be an onerous burden to suggest as such. However, there's also a goal of reducing pavement and improving runoff and the streetscape of our properties as well. And so at least as a half measure, to say that the front parking lot, which is currently pavement to, more or less sidewalk to sidewalk, be properly screened or landscaped or, new curbed islands put in or something along those lines that are also part of all of the dictates that are theoretically triggered by this 200 square feet of facade renovation.
Yeah, but Matt, but there's a separate applicability trigger under specific to the parking lot, under 112.16B. It says that these standards apply to any parking lot and associated driveways that are newly constructed, expanded, substantially modified, or substantially reconstructed.
But I mean, the very first thing is these regulations shall apply to all proposed actions within the MU district, which include one or more of the following activities. And 200 square feet is a trigger for everything.
But you still then have to go and read the rest of the, okay, so 112.16D, is that applicable? Then you've got to determine when that's applicable. Just like I was saying about the new construction. I mean, you have to read, you can't read these things in isolation.
Well, but I've always, I think that's the problem, is that the way this is written. So new building construction would trigger the entire design standard, which would include the parking.
Only if that required you, which this would. I mean, they would have to, if they had to build on the parking lot and modify that parking lot, then that would trigger all of these things. So the question is, as I think this conversation started with, is whether or not this works. There was a conscious decision at the time these were actually amended, because that trigger is different than it was originally adopted. Whether that threshold, should be as low as it is, or what that means, because there is that inherent tension, which the board that adopted this was quite aware of that, and that the issue was debated during the drafting and adoption of this, is where do you strike that balance as to not discouraging people from improving their property, but also not encouraging people to continue to invest in non-compliant properties, but rather to encourage them to invest in compliant properties.
Right.
But
So I guess at this point, Chip, I'm looking to you to see what variance we're going to be granting. Are we going to be granting?
the variance that's in front of you is the one that Tim presented to you, which is.
That's two variances there. There really isn't.
Yeah, it's one.
No, it's not. It's if you deny it, if you deny it, that would, and they wanted to do something, and they wanted to try to comply, then that would, I would agree that would then trigger a whole bunch of other additional issues. It wouldn't necessarily be variances. They might decide, hey, we're going to comply. We're actually going to do what the code's actually trying to encourage us to do, which is to build a 2-story front facing, parking in the rear. But that's not what they're looking to do with, apparently, they want to
so we've got 1 and 2.
make the building look nicer.
We've got 1 and 2 on the permit denial here. The number 1 is per code section 112.16A 4A4. A change in facade materials and design greater than 200 square feet triggers the need for the building to be brought into compliance. So if we grant the second variance, which says the setback, how do they comply with the first part?
I guess it's just how you're reading it. I'm listing number 1 so that you know that number 2 triggers because of that. I'm not asking for a variance.
Yeah, but
That's the way I read it.
okay, I
read it as if he's given us an explanation as to what triggered.
That was my intent. Maybe I should have numbered it 1 and 2. I should have put the statement and then just numbered it as the variance they need.
Right.
The variance they need is the front yard setback.
It really makes no difference, I would imagine, to the applicant or to me, for instance, why it was triggered. The fact of the matter is they don't want to pick up their building and move it to the sidewalk. And I'm ready to make it.
And while I'm saying that is that your interpretation is it is in compliance completely except for that part of the variance that we're going for.
Yeah, I mean, you could take that a lot of different ways.
Well,
This is where I land.
That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing.
This is where I
That's what
land.
we're taking your word.
Yeah.
Now, does everyone understand that on the board? that Tim's ruling is that that number one, that this building does meet number one, except for this rear, the front yard setback.
I
Okay.
understand.
All right, so let's ask for a motion.
I'll make a motion that we accept the variance request as submitted. Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Freeze, seconded by Mr. Celeste. Did you get that, Debbie?
To approve as submitted.
That's correct.
Yes.
Please, on the question. Please call the roll.
Mr. Freeze,
Yes.
Mr. Celeste,
Yes.
Ms. Fullwiler. Ms. Fullwiler, Mr. Tyne,
Yes.
Mr. Andrews,
Yes,
Thank you for your commitment to the
Okay.
village. It really looks nice.
variance passes 5-0. Thank you very much, folks.
Yeah, what's left of it?
Okay, is there anything to be brought before this board? Nobody else?
Sir, I make a motion that we adjourn.
A motion to adjourn by Mr. Freeze, seconded by Ms. Fullwiler. All in favor? Aye. Mr. Ito, you still there? Matt, you
Yep,
there?
I'm here. I'm here.
So put on your list accessory structures too, while you're at it. I'm sure you had it on there anyway, but.
You know, I'm thinking maybe we're just gonna ball up 112 and throw it in the trash.
I wouldn't necessarily advocate for that, but it definitely
Always the attorney.
well, look,
Now, I think what we should consider doing on this front end thing with these triggers is we might want to consider trying to create a table like we have in the sign code.
yeah,
Where it's very clear if you're doing this, dots apply to you and these dots don't apply to you.
yeah,
You know,
right.
Sleeping on your shoulder right now.
the way that is written,